Basically, we can differentiate the selection method into three major approaches. The first one is the pseudo-scientific methods. The second one is the less scientific method. And the last one is the scientific method that we highly emphasize on. For the less scientific method, indeed, this is quite common and classical, but it's not as good as the scientific method that we will suggest. In the following, we're going to explain one by one. Graphology is the study of personality through handwriting analysis. This is one of the typical pseudo-scientific methods for the selection process. Although this is not very common, but it is still using in France and Israel. As shown in this example, experts interpret handwriting as the person fears failure and fears change, to set goals with the lower risk. And he will also interpret this person as remained in a bad situation too much too long and also find imperfection with himself. And he's rarely successful in his own eyes. In conclusion, experts conclude that this person is low in self-esteem. By using this method, it seems that it is not very scientific as well. It is not scientifically supported. However, our criterion is, number one, reliability. It seems that it's very low because, well, every time it seems not very consistent because people's handwriting could be very different. So the reliability should be very low. Fertility is still very horrible because according to the research, it seems not correctly hire the right person. Number three, fairness. And there is no real research on this, but probably it's not very fair at all, because in what judgment, what criteria that we can interpret this person is reliable, is a good employee, or is a good performance or not? It seems no clue to tell us. Another type of the selection method is the lesson scientific method, and these are very common in selection. Usually, companies will base on their CV and applications to select the candidates. There are almost 94% of the company will use this method, and 88% will use referees reference. And 72% will also use interview to select the right candidates. What are the benefits and disadvantages on using application and CVs only to select the candidates? The benefits could be it's easy to use and also ease of comparisons. It can be used again and again from the pool. It seems quite easy to operate. However, the drawback could be because it is quite timely to read all the CV and applications, and it may also involve some bias. It may not be so accurate and cannot fully reflect on what the job success and performance of the employees. We might generally consider that using application and CV could be the first screening procedures. Because remember that according to our criteria, reliability, fidelity, and fairness, it seems that the reliability is not very high by using application and CV only to select the right candidate. We don't have much confidence that it is very reliable. And well, for the fidelity, we are not quite sure too, because we only read from the CV to what extent that it could accurately hire the right people to fill in the right position. It seems not very sure. And finally, fairness. It seems the fairness standard is quite low. It is not so fair by using this method, because to what extent you don't know how accurate the CVs are unless you really check all the information and to do the fact check for all of them. However, Well, in most of the time, either we will just base on the experience or sometimes the bias of the company in order to screen out the candidate if they are looking for the CV. And so it seems not really so fair to the candidates. Another method is references. It usually obtained from current or past employees. The benefits could be the participants react positively to them, very popular method, because, well, you can get some support from the external parties, the current or the past employers, so that, well, to make sure that someone's also supporting them, he or she is a good candidate. However, the drawbacks could be it's extremely full of bias because it all depends on the referee's comment and feedback. It may also create the expectation of the candidates that if read before the meeting. Indeed, another big drawback could be that if the employee have a very good relationship with those referee, even though he or she is not well qualified, but because he asked the referee to supporting them, and so the referee actually they may not 100% reflect what do they think, and so we could say that it still involves a lot of the bias here. Remember that our criteria, reliability, utility, and also fairness issue. Reliability standards, it seems quite poor for using the reference because people rarely say the same things or agree. It is really hard to make some direct comparisons according to the reference from different candidates. Fidelity seems also very poor, and the fairness is even very, very poor because who would you choose as the reference? Usually the one who have a good relationship with the candidates. They're nominating them as their referee. So it seems not very fair. A lot of the possible issues could also involve like, do reference writers know job requirement well? It might not, because it's just based on their knowledge on the candidates, but it doesn't mean that they know about the job requirement of the company or in a particular position. And they just think about what is the job requirement instead. And usually, well, the response rate is also as low as 35% sometimes. So that's why, well, it seems that it's not a good method in selecting the right candidate if only relying on using references. How about interviewed? The interviewer may ask, how do you want this job? And usually the interviewee will reply, I've always been passionate about being able to afford food. And what do you think about this interview question and answer? It is typical questions to ask, what and why do you want this job? And so it's a kind of the impression management sometimes. For the candidates, if they only saying that I've always been passionate about being able to afford food, and then of course I could 100% sure, or not 100%, even not 100%, but still a large extent that we can consider that this candidate cannot be selected after that. Because organization usually not only require someone to do the job because of money, they really want someone to love the job. They like the job position. That's why many interviewee, they learn it and they can manipulate their answer. They can also do a lot of the impression management to impress their boss. However, the interviews is still the most popular from the selection process. But only 1% of the organization ever use any form of the interview. There are two major types of the interviews. One is the unstructured one, and other one is the structural interview. For the interviews, in this the benefits could be it is widely accepted by the candidates. We all expected to have the interview. Is able to abstract large amounts of the information because you can ask a lot of different questions, can also possibly be good predictor of performance or success. However, the disadvantages could be there is full of a bias, and also sometimes the participants, the candidate, could lie because they're using the impression management tactics, and so probably, this may not fully reflect their true personality as well as their performance. Besides that, it also may induce some stress level, and it could be quite costly because, well, the organization needs to put a lot of effort to set up the interview, and they also need to pay a lot for the interview to recruit the interviewer as well. For the unstructured interview, and for essentially, a conversation between the employer and applicants with no fixed set of the question or scoring guideline, and it's just based on some informal interaction. In that, sometimes it can be done by the HR practitioners, and also, well, it might not be well trained hiring people, and so it may not be as good as what we expect. An unstructured interview will also involve a huge amount of bias because we do not have certain standard or guideline to follow. And it's just a kind of the informal conversation, and it could involve a lot of bias. And they only rely on the interviewer's personal beliefs of the ideal candidates, the experience, and also the job requirement. And it will largely reduce the validity and reliability. We like those who are similar to us. And well, this is also one of the major problems by using the unstructured interview. We usually like to hire someone who is similar to us. So a lot of the unfair situation occurred, including like the racial similarity. We may have a higher rating on someone who share the similar gender, racial, age, etc. with us. And then, well, it can also attract the candidates assigned a higher rating, overweight the candidates given the lower rating, a loss of a bias. We might like someone who is similar to us and unlike someone who is very distinctive from us. So this is also a loss of the problem occurred by using the unstructured interview. Criteria: 3 criteria. Reliability is relatively low. Fertility, just in the mediums, because well, it all depends on the experience of the interviewer, and also, well, it seems very poor in the sense of the fairness. In that, well, we are also suggesting to have the scientific method in order to do the screening and selecting the right candidate. Scientific method including like the structured interview, there's psychometrics, situational judgment test, work samples, biodata, and also well, by having the assessment centers. Structured interview is very different from the unstructured interview. This type of the interviews with standardized questions and usually based on the job analysis, and to ask the employees their requirement, ability, capability to work on that particular job positions. And we are supposing to train the interviewer, and so in order to reduce the bias. And finally, we also need to work on the evaluation on the structured interview. And we are supposing it is much better than the unstructured interview. There are 2 types of structured interview. The first one is situational, some verbal work samples. The candidates will be given some work situation and then to ask them what should they do, the situational sample. For the behavioral one, they will ask the candidates to describe their past experience, the past behavior. One of the examples is to think of a time when you successfully handle an angry client. If we are going to hire a customer service provider to ask them what do they do. So from the answer, we're trying to interpret whether he or she is capable and have the experience in doing the job. Is there any several ways on how we should do in order to improve the structural interview? Yes, number one is we should use multiple interviewers instead of one single interviewer in order to reduce the bias and improve the reliability. People should have some bias, and for increasing the number of the interviewers, we suppose to increase the reliability to hire the right person, and will also reduce the bias from different interviewers. The same interviewer for all candidates could also increase the standardization. Otherwise, different candidates will be interviewed by different interviewer, and so the judgment standards could be varied. Train the interviewer. In order to increase the standardization, awareness of bias, and also some actions that they have to follow, we are suggesting to have training given to the interviewer. And we also need to take notes during interview in order to increase the memory retention, because we always interview lots of the candidates, and so we cannot easily identify and distinguish different candidates. So we are suggesting to ask the interviewer to take some notes in order to increase the inter-rater reliability if we are also using different and multiple interview as well. For the structural interview as a whole, we can see that it all relatively fulfilled the three criteria. The reliability standardized will improve the reliability. Fidelity, it sounds much better. And also the fairness, it seems better if the interviewee are well trained and the criteria, the questions are all standardized. Another method is psychometric test. Psychometric test is to use to measure our mind. Psychometrics are standardized tests. It is designed to ensure the reliability and validity, and usually will have a high level of the fair and consistent manner, and we're trying to quantify something, including like our personality as well as our intelligence. And here is one of the examples that we can see from the psychometric test. Can you try these questions? What is the answer? A, B, C, D, E, or F? What is it? The answer could be E. Because we think about it, and does it also have a pattern in order to test your logical thinking, and so to see whether you can interpret some logical reasoning and to develop your critical mind. Psychometric test is going to test our intelligence as well. So many definitions of intelligence, of course, is talking about the IQ, the intelligence quotations, or are you talking about some cognitive intelligence or any other types of the intelligence? Indeed, test exists for intelligence as a whole or some specific certain aspects. GMA, the General Mental Ability Test, is one of the strongest predictors of performance. But besides that, we also have some specific intelligence tests like the numerical test, the verbal test, or spatial test. Psychometric tests can be also used to test a candidate's personality. But because we've already have discussion on this topic in the personality lecture, and so we are not going to talk too much about this. In sum, psychometric test is based on the trait theory, especially the Big Five model. Personality tests can describe the behavior, but may not necessarily predict it. And we can also see that the issues with some personality tests can vary its fertility because it all depends on the job type as well as the industries. In some of the situations, probably by using the personality test cannot fully reflect whether the employee's behavior as well as the performance in certain job types and industry. We cannot 100% sure and how to what extent that we can accurately predict their behavior in some future. Because in most of the time, people will lie. And so, in some of the cases, organization will also consider it to incorporate to use the social desirability test together with this personality test, so that to ensure that and to see whether the candidates are lying. There are some positive and some drawbacks for the psychometric test. The benefits, including like it is quite standardized and easy to access, quite flexible, and also easy to generate the data and making a comparison. For the disadvantages could be it might be quite costly if you need to get the license, to buy the license to do the test. And it may also negative the candidate's reaction. They feel annoying, unhappy to work on the test. And some issue may inherent in the process, including like the candidates may not being tested on the personality, especially something like the self-awareness may lead to some distort or some inaccurate result. Because some of the candidates, they can lie, they know what personality that the interviewer, the companies are looking for. And also, well, we will also need to consider about does the test really reflect the true intelligence and personality? Somehow, we also need to take a consideration on all these concerns. Indeed, well, if we are doing the analysis on the critiques for the psychometric test, we can see that the reliability, especially on the intelligence part, could be quite high because a lot of the tests already done and adopted, and so it seems the predictive power is quite high. For the personality, it seems quite moderate because personality may not fully reflected by using this type of the test. Fidelity for the intelligent parts could be high, but for the personality again is quite moderate to low level only. Because, well, whoever knows which personality test could fit with which position, so it seems not very clear. Fair. For both the intelligence as well as the personality test is the moderate level. We can say, well, it's moderately high because, well, this is quite a standardized test. Anyway, well, we could consider that this is also one of the methods that we can consider if we are choosing a more scientific method for the selection.